All right, good morning and welcome back. Today is our final official lesson for this chapter. Okay, so go to 6.5 in your notes. We're going to talk about what happens when we don't have such a nice situation. So what I mean by that is like sine of 22 degrees. Before, if you think about it on here, we were either doing like 30, 45, 60, 90. One of these that was nice for us. Now, some of you might think that's not a nice answer. Like square root of 2 over 2, that's not nice. But in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty nice. It's organized, it's consistent, doesn't have a decimal, okay, because we can leave it as a radical there. Now, today we're going to talk about what happens when it's not like that. So sometimes you're going to have to use your calculator. In this situation, we're going to use our calculator. And the keywords that allow us to know that, if you ever see the word approximate, so let me put that here. So if it says approximate, or the other one that's a little more obvious is if it says calculator. Okay, so if it tells you to use your calculator, obviously you use it. Now, if you don't have access to this calculator, you're not going to be able to follow along. So you need to go to my Google Classroom, scroll all the way to the very end. The first thing I posted way back in January was a way for you guys to get this on your computer. Okay, so only on your Chromebook though. So if you need help with that, please reach out. Now, before we do this, we need to be very careful. When you're solving these, we're approximating them using our calculator. It's very easy, but we have to be very careful that we're in the correct mode. So when I say, what mode are you in? We have two choices, either degrees or radians. Okay, those are the two different options. Now, for this first one, sine of 22 degrees, obviously we want to be in degrees. So if we go, look up here, you turn on your calculator. The way you can check, you hit mode right beside the second. And down a few right here, it says radian. We need it to be on degree. So we're going to arrow down, arrow over, and hit enter. Okay, now we are on degree. You have to hit enter to change it to degrees. Now, there are two ways you can get off of the screen. You can either hit clear, or if we're back on the mode, do you see now it stayed as degree? The other option is you can hit second quit. Either one works. So once again, I think it's important we take some notes on that. If you are not super familiar with the calculator, which I think most of us are not, so to switch, we hit mode. And if you're not sure where that is, it's the top by the second key. So if you know where it's at, you don't have to write this, but it's top by the second key. Then, it's the third one down. And you choose radians or degrees. And then you hit enter. All right. Now, if you're not sure, then you hit clear or second quit. You can write that, but I think most of you can figure that out. All right, so now, when we are finding them, because of this situation, I think it's good. Let's do all the degrees first, and then we'll deal with all the radians. So if we go right here, once again, double check. We're going to go mode. It's in degrees. I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to move the calculator over there. So it's in degrees, so we can hit clear. Okay, now, sine of 22. This one's pretty easy. All we do is sine 22, close your parenthesis, and we hit enter. Now, I forgot to mention this. Let's go 3 decimal places. Okay, so the thousandths. Okay, so in our case here, we have 0.375 when we round it. Okay, as you can see, it was 0.3746. So 0.375. Okay. Now, we're going to skip 2 because that's a radian. We could do that, but we'd have to switch back and forth. So to save some time, I'm going to go to example 3 here. Now we're doing the same thing. This time there's a negative 58. So you have two options. The first option, we know we could add 360 to that. If we add 360, we get to 302. And I can take the tangent of 302, and I get an answer. However, the other option, you don't even have to do that when you're using calculator. You can just do tangent. And be sure you use this negative at the bottom. But negative 58, we close our parenthesis, hit enter, and you'll see those two values are the exact same, negative 1.600. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, that makes sense. It's negative because it was negative 58. No, that's not why it's negative, okay? The negative is based on its location. As you know, negative 58, or as we said, 302, that's over here in quadrant 4, okay, right around here. We know that these tangents are negative because the sine and the cosine have opposite signs. So it will always be negative. Okay, we got one more to do before we switch to radians. Now this one, secant of 243. Now here's the deal. Back when we found secant, we know that secant is paired up with our cosine. And before, we've always taken the reciprocal, right? The reciprocals, x and then 1 over x. And when we had fractions, that's really easy. The numerator and the denominator, they switch places, you're set. However, when we're doing it in our calculator, we want to go from x to 1 over x right here. So another way to think about that is 1 over the cosine. So now, what we need to do, on your calculator, you're going to hit alpha, the alpha key. Okay, then you're going to hit the y equals, and then you're going to hit enter. And that's how you can get a fraction. Now, you wouldn't have to do that, okay? But I think it's nice because it shows it in a better way. So what I mean by that, alpha, y equals, and then I hit enter. And do you see how now that sets up this fraction for me? Then we said we want 1 on top. And then right here, secant, that pairs up with cosine. So I can just put, oops, I was trying to type it. I want to hit cosine of 243. And I close that parenthesis. And I hit enter. And we are done. Okay, so negative 2.203. We rounded up because it was 2026. The 6 makes us round up. So once again, we did that because 1 over cosine of 243. Because secant and cosine are paired up, they are reciprocals. Okay, so to show you one more time how we get that fraction, you go alpha over here on the left, then up here y equals, and then hit enter. And you get your fraction bar. Now, if you didn't want to, you wouldn't have to. So when we did it, alpha y equals enter, we did 1 over the cosine of 243. Okay, and that's what we got. Technically, you also could just do 1 divided by the cosine of 243. However, as you see, they're the same answer. I think this is good to get you in the habit of what is actually happening. Okay, we're creating that fraction. It's a little easier to see it this way, and later, if we have to like multiply things on the bottom, it just keeps it a little more organized for us. Okay, so now we've got 3 more we got to do on this side, and now these last 3 are all radians. So to do this, to switch it, we go to mode, scroll down to radians, hit enter, and now it's changed. Okay, if I scroll off of it, it stays there, which is good. And then either second quit or just hit clear and it's out of the way. Now, to find cosine of 5 pi over 12, that one pretty easy. We just do cosine. And we want to be precise, so don't use 3.14 for pi. Instead, do 5, then hit second pi divided by 12. We close the parenthesis, hit enter, and there's our answer. If we round to the third decimal, 0.259. Okay. Now, down here, cosecant of pi over 8. Remember cosecant, and maybe I should have made this note. Secant pairs with cosine, or it's 1 over the cosine. Okay, cosecant pairs with sine, or 1 over sine. And then finally, cotangent would be 1 over the tangent. So on this one, 1 over the sine. So once again, I'm going to do alpha, y equals, enter to get that. Now 1's on top, and then on the bottom, it's going to be our sine of pi divided by 8. We close that, hit enter, and there we go. We got 2.613. Okay, the final one now, the cotangent, which is a reciprocal of tan. So once again, alpha, y equals, enter. Okay, 1 over, and then on this one I'm going to do tangent of 8 pi, so second caret key, divided by 7. Close our parentheses, hit enter, and there we go. We've got 2.077. I'll round this one up because it was 765. That 5 makes us round up. So there's one final thing we need to learn. And if this was confusing, feel free to send me an email or reach out or go back and watch it again. Okay, the final thing we're going to talk about is how do I know what quadrant something is in? Now, what I mean by that is this question here, in what quadrant is it going to be in when the sine is greater than 0 and the cosine is less than 0? Now, if we think about it, first let's identify we've got our 4 quadrants, and we don't need this anymore. So our 4 quadrants, so let's start quadrant 1, and on this, in each quadrant we have your sine, your cosine, and your tangent. Quadrant 2, and I'm just going to kind of write this out to help us out so then we can figure out something about these. So in each quadrant, the sine, cosine, and tangent are either positive or negative. Okay? And we're going to create this chart so we kind of have a guidance on that. So keep in mind, our sine represents the y value. Okay? So y is positive when it's above the x-axis. So this sine is positive, this sine is positive. Meanwhile, in quadrant 3 and 4, it is negative. Now cosine, that's our x value. So cosine is positive when it's to the right. So both 1 and 4 would be positive. Both 2 and 3 are negative. Now, tangent. Since tangent is sine divided by cosine, or O over A, the only time it's positive is if these are the same. So plus over plus, that gives us a positive. Also, though, minus divided by minus, that becomes positive. But if they're different, like on 2 and 4, it will be negative. So, with that knowledge now, on example 7, sine is greater than 0. So if sine is greater than 0, we know it's either quadrant 1 or 2, because positive for y means up. Now cosine is less than 0, so that means cosine is negative. So over here, our answer, quadrant 2. Now, some of you, maybe it's easier not to use the chart. You don't have to use the chart. Some of you it'll be helpful for. I like to think about it in terms of x and y, as I'm pretty familiar with my coordinate plane. Now on this next one, tangent is less than 0. That means tangent's negative. So it's either quadrant 2 or 4. But then we see here secant is greater than 0. Unfortunately, we didn't put secant on here. But we know secant pairs up with cosine. And even when you take the reciprocal of something, it doesn't change the sign. So what I mean by that is if I have like 1 over 10, the reciprocal of that's just 10 over 1. If I had negative 1 over 10, the reciprocal of that would be negative 10 over 1. You see how if it's positive, it stays positive. If it was negative, it stays negative. So even though we don't know what, we don't have secant on our chart, since secant matches up with cosine, if secant is positive, that means cosine was also positive. So the only spot where the cosine is positive and the tangent is negative, and if it helps you, just put a little mark here. And the only time that happens would be quadrant 4 here. Okay, so this one, cosecant, that pairs up with sine, so we know sine is positive. Cotangent pairs up with tangent, which is also positive. So the only place tangent is positive and sine is positive would be up here, quadrant 1. Okay, on the next one, tangent is positive once again. Cosecant is negative. Cosecant pairs with sine. So sine is negative over here. Tangent is positive. Okay, so that's going to be Q3. Now, if I were you, I'd pause the video and try these last two on your own, and then check. So here, sine is less than 0, so that's negative. Secant is greater than 0, so that's going to be positive. Remember, secant pairs with cosine. So cosine's positive, sine is negative. Cosine's positive, sine is negative. That's over here, quadrant 4. And our final one, cosine is negative. Cotangent is negative, which is the same as tangent. So where are both tangent and cosine negative? And that's over here, quadrant 2. So, hope you guys had a great day. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'll see you guys soon.